So hello and welcome back to the MCC Brussels podcast. I'm Jacob Reynolds, delighted to be joined by a very special guest this week. Welcome to James Orr. James, welcome.
Good to be with you, Jacob.
And also welcome back to our colleague Richard Schenk. Welcome.
It's a great day. Happy to be here.
Coming up on the podcast this week, we're going to talk about another cancel culture debacle here in Brussels. We're going to look at the rise of reform in the UK and the immigration debate there. We're also going to take a look at the relationship between the EU and the Trump administration. And we're going to take a look at the culture war over Israel's participation in Eurovision. Right, so coming first to events here in Brussels, James, I have to say it feels a bit like deja vu. The last time James and I were together in Brussels, it was the kind of debacle around the NatCon conference, which they tried 3 times to shut down, and we managed to hold the line and keep that conference going. But this week is another attempt by Antifa cowards to close down an event in Brussels, our event on Trump and the New World Order, which James is going to be speaking at later today as we record this. They managed to, with egg throwing, close one of the venues from hosting the event. But don't worry, and typical MCC Brussels style, we've held the line. We've got another venue lined up and we're looking forward to the event going ahead. But James, is it your fault? Should we stop inviting you to Brussels? Is this the issue? Or what's up with this kind of Antifa attack on free speech?
I do seem to be cursing your amazing gatherings. Yes, I mean, it was particularly apposite for me because I just came out of the BBC studios in London when I got your message that the event this evening was being cancelled. The venue was going to have to be changed. And during that debate, I had quite an aggressive member of parliament insist that J.D. Vance's claims in his Munich speech of a few months ago that there was a genuine free speech crisis in Europe and that Europe needed to get its act together if it was going to wield the moral authority that it needed to wield against authoritarian, autocratic regimes in Russia and China and elsewhere. So in effect, it just proved my point that yet again, in the cradle of Europe, the cradle of European values, European liberties, here in Brussels, we have seen yet again another pathetic attempt to shut us down by the hard left. And the hard left, as always, are just what they're criticizing. It is they who are the true illiberal fascists. It's they who can't tolerate argument. They can't allow a space for free speech because they know that they haven't got the arguments. This is the last resort of the scoundrel, really, and simply reaffirms my sense certainly, that liberalism, an ideology that is founded on freedom, is now incapable of upholding the most basic freedoms.
Yeah, and Richard, I mean, we've seen these tactics before. We're no stranger to them, but this attempt to intimidate venues into silence is the favorite tactic of Antifa.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's quite easy to scare a venue into just canceling the event because obviously the economic case for them is quite difficult if there are damages or danger to the employees. But what scares me even most than the Antifa itself, because Antifa are radicals, but they are a pretty small group even here in Belgium, is a more than tacit approval of the Brussels regional and city government of this. So only some weeks ago, the Brussels city government declared that this is an anti-fascist city, which was more than a signal. We know that several municipal facilities are open to these people, maybe even money is flowing. So this is the real problem, that the political establishment is using them as the avant-garde of their own agenda, and maybe the Antifa itself they are just the useful idiots for their political purposes, of the real political perpetrators behind the suits.
Yeah, can I make a quick point here? I mean, fascism is a word that has been so abused. It is it has effectively suffered from kind of concept creep, and it's simply used as a term of abuse now. And we don't, but if you go back and think about what is it that distinguishes fascism as an authoritarian ideology, what distinguishes it from other kinds of authoritarian ideologies is corporatism, is the way that it wields not just state power, and it certainly is wielding state power, but the way it aligns itself with corporate interests and uses private corporations and the private sector to achieve its ideological ends. Now, I don't want to be too harsh on the hotel that was threatened by these thugs yesterday. I don't know the details I could imagine if I was manager at that hotel and I had these complete crazies outside threatening to abuse my staff, I might well have done the same thing. And wasn't a particularly political person and couldn't understand what was going on. However, I think what we are seeing all across the West is the use of effectively private corporations understanding the emerging ideology and aligning itself with, as it were, the apparatus of the state regime to enforce its ideological ends. So, I'm not just, when I say that Antifa are the real fascists, I don't just mean because they just want to shut down free speech. I mean, they are actually using and deploying the very techniques that were distinctive of fascism as an ideology in the first half of the 20th century.
Yeah, and this kind of moral cosplaying, as we've called it in some of our work recently, is really at the root of the problem, isn't it, Richard? With the fact that what you've got is ultimately a very small group of people. It might be quite radical, but a very small group of people who have adopted this garb of the kind of progressive, tolerant, kind of freedom-loving group. But actually, is just a show, just a kind of costume they wear.
Yeah, obviously they feel themselves on the moral high ground, and they all justify basically everything with the anti-fascist stance. They say this for human rights or against genocide or whatever the reason today is to apply violence to shut down dissident voices. And as James said, I had the same experience back then in my university time in Germany with them, that these people are actually very well aligned, often with big interests. So within these radical groups, you often have one or two persons who understand the importance of what they are doing, and they are steering the other ones who are just ideologically and speaking in a tunnel. They are very easy to steer from the background towards the interests of political parties, big corporations, whoever. So this is the real danger of Antifa.
Can I make another point? I mean, I can't quite remember the precise theme of this evening's event, but it's about Trump and his significance for the significance of the Trump administration for Europe. That was the subject. We're having a dialogue on it. Now, this isn't some crazy far-right dictator whose election we're starting to, maybe get a little bit worried about. This is the leader of the free world, whether you like it or not. This is somebody who's voted in by more than 75 million Americans, voted in by all 7 of the swing states, got the largest GOP win for many, many years, and he is the leader of a country that is subsidizing the defense of Brussels, of Belgium, of Western Europe, of Eastern Europe against looming authoritarian threats in the East to the tune of $800 billion a year. And we're not allowed simply to debate the nature of that relationship, which is evolving, which is getting more complex, and therefore that needs public scrutiny, public debate from all sorts of different angles. I think I'll probably be making some criticisms of the Trump administration tonight, and I think I'll probably be offering some endorsements of it too. But, the idea that this is some sort of, fringe, wacky event where potentially unlawful speech would be uttered is just for the birds.
Yeah, well, viewers can rest assured the event's going ahead tonight. Our viewers on our YouTube channel better catch the...
Well done to MCC Brussels.
No, thanks. And yeah, we'll make sure to get all the video up so everyone can look at it. But turning now to the UK, James, really wanted to talk about it, especially having you here. It's an interesting time in UK politics. We just had some local elections. The Reform UK, the challenger populist party in UK, seem to be surging. But at the same time, you've got kind of a seemingly new hardline version of Keir Starmer on immigration. James, what's happening in the UK? Why are Reform surging? What's going on?
Well, before we dive into the UK, I mean, let's just wind back a year. I remember at the NatCon conference that MCC co-sponsored in April of last year here in Brussels, the Brits were feeling a bit beleaguered and lonely as all of these extraordinary electoral developments were sweeping across mainland continental Europe. And yet it now looks as if we're catching up a little bit. So what's happening now in Britain is really a sort of, you could see the emergence of a kind of electoral alignment with what's happening, what we're seeing with the AfD in Germany, what we're seeing in with the Rassemblement National in France, what we're seeing with Chega in Portugal, Vox to some extent in Spain, Meloni. So this is part of a pattern sweeping across the West right now, not to mention, of course, the Trump-Vance win last November. Diving into Reform, I mean, at the time of recording, we're 2 weeks on from the largest electoral battering that the Conservative Party certainly has had in a very, very long time, possibly ever. Reform UK, this is the local elections, so to be clear, there were something like 1,600 council seats up across England, and of those, Reform won 677. The Tories, the Conservative Party, British Conservative Party, that is to say, the most successful electoral winning machine in political history, lost a comparable number. Now, if that was extrapolated into a vote share, that would put Reform on 30%, it would put the Conservative Party on 15%, and I think it would put the Labour Party, which is currently the governing party, of course, round about 20%. So this is an astonishing result. It's very difficult to overstate to non-UK listeners how significant and unprecedented this is. This is the first time since 1924 that a party other than the Labour Party and the Conservative Party has come in the top two, if we leave aside the European elections that are done by proportional representation, so it's more complicated in 2019. And it is the first time in our history, it is the first time in British political history that a right-wing party other than the Conservative Party has emerged victorious in the top two. Actually, it won the local elections. So what we're witnessing is astonishing. It's tempting to say this is a flash in the pan. This can't be real. All these political analysts who know their history just don't know how to make sense of this. But if you look at the polling, there's been a big spike in the polling since the elections, partly because of the pretty positive press that came out of it, though I noticed that both the BBC and a couple of other mainstream newspapers immediately put some interview that Prince Harry had given to the front page and to try and take the sheen off Reform's victory. But I saw another poll this morning that puts Reform on something like 33. It puts the Tories on 19 and the government in the low 20s. So it looks as if the polling trajectories are stabilising. Look, we've got a long time to the next general election, 4 years. 2029 is the latest that Keir Starmer can call the next UK general election, and he will probably wait to the very last minute. And all sorts of things can happen in that time. Reform is fragile in different ways that we can discuss. But yes, truly unprecedented times.
Yeah, and Richard, James mentioned this, but this mirrors not just to the level of results, but also a kind of structurally an issue that we see right across Europe, which is that you have a nominally centre-right or conservative party that is slowly kind of declining, sometimes declining very quickly, in part because many people think that it's just those parties just abandon the voters that they're supposed to represent.
Yeah, this was one of the main contributors to the rise of parties to the right of the traditional European People's Parties, members parties across Europe. That these parties gave up their stances on migration. This was the focal point for many European countries where right-wing movements flourished and began to establish themselves. There's currently a group of countries that is very interesting because it seems that one group of traditional parties seem to have understood that and are doing something about it. And these are the social democratic parties in Scandinavia. Denmark is the most important example. And also from the opposition in Sweden and Finland, they are regaining control, trying to regain control over migration issues and taking the narrative back into the political center. And I think they are the only ones who found a recipe against the rise of the right, because they understood that there is a gap in representation, and in combination with traditional leftist economic policies, this is a very powerful combination at the ballot box. This is something that can generate your majority across the general population. And I think maybe Keir Starmer saw that if you look at the developments of the last days.
Yeah, that brings me exactly on what I wanted to talk about next, is that over the last few days there's been and indeed over the last few months, Keir Starmer progressively hardening rhetoric on a variety of issues. But the kind of big headline that's really shocked a lot of people, caused all kinds of commentators in the UK to compare Keir Starmer now to a fascist, is a new kind of harder stance on migration. Some of the policies we might welcome, James, but do you believe it?
No, I don't believe it in the slightest, and I don't think the policies that he announced 2 days ago will do anything or at least anything to really address voters' concerns. I think even on the government's own estimates, the policies, if implemented, would lead to anything between a 50 to 100,000 reduction in net migration, given that we are well north of 500,000 net in terms of net migration. That's really just a drop in the bucket. And it would be, I think, if you look at the illegal refugees coming across on the channel, those numbers are spiking, are increasing at unprecedented rates because Starmer and Starmer's government are being perceived as a soft touch. So that will almost certainly neutralize any gains that these policies achieve in any event. Nothing can really happen on the migration debate for as long as we remain under the jurisdiction of a foreign court, for as long as foreign judges in Strasbourg can tell us who we can and can't have in our country, who can and can't be a member of the national family, who we can and can't deport. We are powerless. And so really I see, unless we can finish off Brexit, unless we can get Strexit done, that is to say, unless we can exit from Strasbourg and return those, vital powers to our own courts and to our parliament, there's absolutely no way we're going to address what is now the most salient and urgent issue for the British people all across the political spectrum.
Yeah, I completely agree with James on this, but I still can't help but somewhat admire Keir Starmer for being almost like the politician of the moment that the moment needed. You needed a political figure who doesn't have any principles whatsoever. He's kind of capable of turning on a dime and saying, I'm now the kind of the candidate who will control the borders. He even had a really good phrase, right? We're turning into an island of strangers, which is like, it's got some kind of rhetorical power to it. So, Richard, do you think he can pull off this kind of Danish rescuing social democracy by tougher migration?
As James said, it's still a long way to go because decades of development regarding migration policy needs to be undone first. Not only undone, but the population needs to see this. They need to regain trust in the established parties. And as the Scandinavian example, I told you, it's still in the beginning, so it will, but it's already showing some results, but it's still in the beginning. And as long as it took decades to reach this point, and it will take decades to undo it again. And we also need to seriously look into the foundations of the current international migration system, because all these international courts, laws, agreements, EU law have put up a system where everybody who sets a foot into Europe will stay, regardless if the asylum application will be accepted, rejected. If there's an attempt to deport this person, most of this person will stay, and everybody knows that you need to get to Europe. And then you somehow will stay here, and this is not a tenable situation.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, in the case of the UK, I mean, as I said it on the BBC yesterday, I mean, if you're going to do a U-turn, you're going to have to pull the handbrake hard, and I think that heated rhetoric about the island of we risk becoming an island of strangers was designed to just show that he meant business. So I think although the policies are not going to work, the discourse is captured. What was unthinkable for the mainstream parties just a year ago, 2 years ago, is now mainstream government policy. All the parties recognise that this is absolutely a necessary policy area problem to address. And, if reform has achieved nothing else, it's shifted the Overton window very dramatically in the space of barely a year on this issue. Now, because reform is so associated with this policy in particular, and also its critique of net zero, also its critique of DEI, all three areas which the electorate cares a great deal about, I just don't think that it's going to really help Labour or the Tories as they change tack on these issues. Very much indeed, very much in the polls. But we'll wait and see.
Yeah, we're in the position now where almost it's almost close to the situation where people might be arrested in the UK under the really restrictive speech codes the UK have for simply saying things online that are official Labour Party government policies, right? Because the things that Keir Starmer says would have had you branded a bigot and extremist. I
don't think his rhetoric went far enough. I mean, he said, we risk becoming an island of strangers. Now, look, we're not an island of strangers entirely. If you're in, leafy Cambridge or in Cheltenham or Worcestershire, it's fine. If you're in the sort of the Shires, you're in the main sort of Tory voting Lib Dem Liberal Democrat counties, you're not going to be worrying about that. But if there are parts of Bradford, Birmingham, Leicester, Tower Hamlets, the East End of London, where, the signs are in Bengali, the signs for the underground station are in Bengali, that it feels as if you're in a foreign country, and they are the people you engage with every day. Just are strangers. Even if you wanted them to be friends, they can't speak English. Many can't speak English. Many don't have to speak English because they're arriving into ready-made communities which are effectively parallel societies, as Louise Casey put it for a government report on the failures of multiculturalism in 2016.
So we're going to be talking about this in a lot more detail tonight, but there was one kind of revealing bit of polling that I suspect might have been commissioned by the other team, as it were. But there's a big piece of polling released this week that the mainstream media had a real field day with in terms of America's perception in the world, and that the narrative is that the Trump administration has caused America to be perceived as this kind of global pariah, that even China or something, even Russia is perceived more positively. And they're trying to tie this into a narrative that Trump is hurting the chances of populists or right-wing conservative parties, national conservative parties right across Europe and beyond. Obviously, there's a setback in Canada, which many people attribute to Trump, but Richard, first, what do you make of this narrative that it's Trump is kind of sending a terminal decline for populism in Europe?
Well, Trump was not particularly shy about his America First message, so he's not trying to have good polling numbers in Europe. So that's so obvious. He will. I think it was a wake up call. It exposed the weakness of Europe in many regards, our dependence on the US, and this actually can be a good fertile ground for any kind of positive pro European in a good sense, pro European awakening, where we put more emphasis on our defense sector, on our economic strength, our innovations. This is something very positive, and in many cases, the anti-establishment parties are criticizing exactly that the army was left out for their being wrought. Our capacity for innovation is low. Bureaucracy is strangling us. So, in many regards, the policy aims that Trump is trying to push in the US are resonating here in Europe, and I think even within the political mainstream to a certain degree. This is there's more like a battle of ideas currently going on how to achieve this European Renaissance, if you want to put it, than a general rejection of general and real antagony to the United States, because we know that we still cannot pick a real fight with them. It would be insane.
Yeah, James, does Trump hurt the chances of populists, or is it more complicated?
I think it is a bit more complicated. I mean, the case of Canada is an unusual one. Yes, Poilievre's defeat was shocking, given that he was effectively 20 points in the polls only a few months ago. But I think people underestimate just how hated Justin Trudeau really was. So I think when he stepped down, that 20-point lead was always going to narrow. Carney is seen as broadly competent and capable, highly qualified. Those who are into credentialism, as most Canadian boomers are, will be impressed by Carney, as many boomer Brits were when he was one of the worst governors of the Bank of England in living memory, and a plainly and a highly political Bank of England. Really, he did a lot of damage to that wonderful institution as the first foreigner to hold it, or at least the first Anglosphere cousin to hold it. Now, elsewhere, it's certainly the case, for example, in UK, if you look at Trump-Vance approval ratings, there's a widespread evidence of an epidemic of Trump derangement syndrome, and not a phrase I particularly like, but I think it captures this sort of a kind of derangement, that is to say, an unwillingness, a deep reluctance to think rationally about what the Trump administration does, and not just what Trump might say on Truth Social or in an unguarded moment in the Oval Office. And I think the other point here is that in Europe, my sense is the mainstream media is still a little bit more trusted than it is in the United States. And on the rare occasions that I absorb mainstream media, either in Britain or Europe, it's obvious that they have very successfully demonized Donald Trump and absolutely everything that he does, and every possible negative spin on every policy that he advances, every word that he says is exaggerated and every good thing that he does, every concrete improvement that he brings about is sidelined and forgotten. I noticed yesterday he gave this superb speech in Saudi Arabia, a speech that any national conservative could have written, that met with thunderous applause from the Saudis there and the international the audience gathered there, but CNN wouldn't run it. CNN simply wouldn't run it. Now, I know CNN's American, but it's also watched to some extent. It's seen and respected here in Europe, maybe one of the very few places left that it is respected. And maybe it's just if you're in a hotel lobby and airport lounges, the ones watching CNN. But I think it gives you a nice index into, the successful demonization of Donald Trump. That has not gone away. It's ramped up. Maybe not quite as bad as it was in the first administration, and I think that's definitely shaping public opinion. But I do think parties on the right need to be cautious about overstating the transatlantic alliance. I have often said to fellow national conservatives in Britain that, we haven't won our political sovereignty back from Brussels only to surrender our cultural sovereignty to Washington, D.C., to Manhattan, to Silicon Valley, and to Harvard University. We have to stop. We have to get out of America brain and recover our pride in Britain and what it is to be Britain. Yes, we have a special relationship with the United States. It's probably more special than any other relationship the United States has. And yet, we are our own nation, and Trump and Vance want nothing more than for Britain to be its own nation, not to be a satrapy of the United States, not to be the 51st state, or is it the 52nd or 53rd at this rate? And I think that's, it's very important to stress that. I don't want to go on too much, but just one final thought. America, and this is the case with many empires over the centuries, has always wrestled with this deep philosophical tension. Is it a people or is it a proposition? Is it a land, a home, or is it an idea? And I think America over the last 100 years has traded very profitably on that ambiguity. It is both a very powerful country, it's a very powerful economy, it has extraordinary people, very distinctive culture. And yet it has also been an empire. It has been the global hegemon since 1989. And what we're seeing now is a retrenchment. What we're seeing with the Trump administration is a dissolution of that ambiguity, a resolution in favor of not so much America first, but America as a people first, not America as a proposition first. And I think that is something which the rest of the world is finding very, very difficult to face up to, and yet that's what's happening. And it's it may have some negative consequences for America around the world, but it's clear that Trump and Vance are willing to pay the price of those consequences. So they were willing to take those risky consequences.
Yeah, well, we'll be discussing this in much more detail tonight, so our viewers will be able to catch that video as soon as we have it ready for you. But one quick topic before we leave it here for the MCC Brussels podcast. I want to come to Eurovision. Our viewers probably have a whole range of opinions on Eurovision. James has already proudly told me he's a proud record of never having watched it. I know other people in the office think very differently, but it's always a source of various political controversies, and there's almost a repeat political controversy this year, which is the role of Israel. So there's been a whole range of complaints about Israel's participation in it, the regular accusations of genocide and all the rest of it, but taking a kind of particular heat this year with the Irish broadcaster trying to refer it to decisions about how and if Israel can take part. Richard, what's happened?
Well, what we saw already happen last year's Eurovision, and it's continuing into this year, is that the cultural scene in Europe is very hostile toward Israel. It's quite pretty much aligned with this. Israel is the oppressor, and Gaza is the Gazans are the oppressed ones. The Palestinians are the oppressed ones. This is the key narrative, and then they go as far as accusing Israel of genocide. So this is the narrative behind it. But what we saw that the actual general public who is watching Eurovision, when they were casting their votes, they were pretty much more in favor of Israel than the establishment was, the cultural establishment was, the juries were. And so they needed to adjust a bit, because obviously they are selling here a product, they're selling here an entertainment product. So they needed to tune down a bit on this discussion, because otherwise people would just tune out, wouldn't watch it anymore. And their solution was to remove all flags from the show itself. In the audience, you could still wave whatever flag you wanted that were not national flags. So this way, they also removed the EU flag, for example, which was raised some eyebrows here in Brussels, but also the LGBTQ flags of various sorts. So they want to depoliticize the entire show a bit, because many people are actually, this is more like many people who tune in are more working class, not that much into this culture war issues anyways. They just want to have a good evening with their families. So they needed to tune down. And I think what's remarkable, though, that these cultural elites are battling or pushing back against this as much as they can. They still want to make a political issue out of this Eurovision as much as they can.
Yeah.
I mean, as I said, I've not watched a second of the Eurovision Song Contest ever. But there's that wonderful line, I think goes from a Scottish poet of the 18th century. Let me write the songs of a nation, and I care not who writes its laws. And I think it's there's a tendency on the right to downplay the impact of culture on how the political and public square is shaped. You might say, let me write the Netflix screenplays of a nation, and I care not who writes its laws. Let me write the songs that pop up in the Eurovision Song Contest, and I care not what downstream laws there are. So the left has always understood this. The right has struggled to understand it. And to go back to my earlier point about fascism, here we've got a perfect textbook example of a Eurovision contest. I don't know who runs the Eurovision contest, but presumably it's some kind of private company or conglomerate or so on. It's not a state. But we have the example of the private sector effectively aligning itself with a very fashionable anti-Semitic ideology that is perfectly aligned with the United Nations, with probably what is being said behind closed doors in many presidencies and within the corridors of power all across Europe. And so, this is a kind of authoritarianism, an authoritarianism that creeps all the way deep into culture, that we're up against. And it's not, I think, not an exaggeration to say that it has fascist features.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks so much to my guest. We'll be back with the MCC Brussels podcast next week at the same time. Remember, if you enjoyed this episode, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where there'll be lots of videos, including this one about Trump's New World Order, the event that they tried to cancel. And also make sure to leave us a comment. Let us know what you'd like us to tackle in future episodes. But for now, thanks so much to Richard.
Thank you very much for having me.
And James, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you, MCC Brussels.